She thought I didn't understand. She whispered it in French, under her breath, a cruel little jab meant to slip past me unnoticed. But I did understand. Every single word. She called me an ugly cow, as if I were beneath her, as if I didn't belong in the same room. In that moment, I felt the sting of betrayal, not from a stranger, but from someone who was supposed to be family. I remember standing there, holding my breath, the warmth of the holiday lights suddenly feeling cold against my skin. People always talk about intuition, that gut feeling when something isn't right. That night, I realized mine had been screaming at me all along, and yet I had silenced it, wanting so badly to believe in the picture-perfect story unfolding in front of me. This isn't just a story about one cruel insult. It's about deception, about masks worn so convincingly that even love and trust get tangled in the lies. It's about a mother's quiet intuition, and the way one Christmas Eve turned into the night, everything came crashing down. But before we reach that moment, let me take you back to when it all began. When she first walked into our lives, I was a widow in my mid-60s, living alone in the same house where I had raised my son. The rooms were quieter these days, filled more with memories than with voices. That evening, though, there was life in the air again. The dining table was dressed with my best china, candles flickered against the glass, and I could feel Daniel's excitement pulsing through the house even before the doorbell rang. Daniel, my only child, was 35, handsome, successful in his career, but with a heart that often trusted too quickly. I had spent years worrying he might never find someone who truly cherished him, someone who saw beyond his ambition and loved him for the man he was. When he walked in with Sophie on his arm, I wanted so badly to believe my waiting was over. Sophie looked like she had stepped out of a dream. Her French accent curled softly around each word. Her manners were impeccable, and she carried herself with a grace that drew every eye. She complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions, and laughed in a way that made even the walls seem warmer. Daniel beamed at her like a man who had finally found home. We sat together, sharing food and stories, and for the first time in years, I let my heart relax. There was a fragile hope blooming in me, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could be the one to bring joy back into Daniel's life, and into mine as well. Still, a small, unshakable whisper lingered at the back of my mind. Hope can be blinding, and I knew that better than anyone. But that night, I chose to silence the doubt. After dinner, Sophie insisted on helping me clear the table. I tried to wave her off, the way hosts often do, but she wouldn't hear of it. She slipped off her bracelet, rolled up her sleeves, and joined me in the kitchen, rinsing glasses and drying plates as though she had always belonged there. It was a small gesture, yet it softened me. In those quiet minutes, with the sound of running water and Daniel's laughter echoing from the living room, I found myself thinking maybe she truly was different. She complimented the little details of my home, the way I had framed old family photos, the smell of cinnamon that always clung to the curtains in December. She asked about Daniel's childhood, and when I spoke of my late husband, she listened with a kindness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. For a woman who had known so much loss and loneliness, to feel seen in that way was almost overwhelming. And Daniel, he glowed. I hadn't seen that boyish spark in him since he was a teenager. He watched her as if she were the answer to every unspoken prayer, and I could feel his pride as he pulled me into the conversation. He wanted me to love her as much as he did. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future not just of solitude, but of family dinners, shared traditions, and laughter filling these rooms again. There was a warmth in my chest, fragile but real, and I held onto it as tightly as I could. I didn't know then how quickly that warmth would be snatched away. The house had quieted after dinner. Daniel was putting away the wine glasses, and Sophie had stepped into the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear. I didn't mean to listen, but the sound of her voice carried through the thin walls, and the sharpness in her tone made me pause. At first, I thought nothing of it, just a woman chatting with a friend back home. But then I caught the words, in French, smooth and dismissive. She mocked me, calling me an ugly cow. The same sting from earlier hit me all over again, but this time it went deeper. Her laughter was cruel, calculated, so unlike the warmth she had just shown at my table. I stayed frozen, the blood rushing in my ears as she kept talking. She spoke of securing her green card, of putting on the act just long enough to be safe. Then, almost casually, she mentioned Daniel's inheritance as though she were already counting it, already planning her exit after 2 years. My son, glowing with love, was nothing more than a stepping stone in her game. My chest tightened, my breath caught. I felt the betrayal burn in my stomach, twisting my hope into something ugly and raw. I wanted to storm into that hallway, to rip the mask from her face in front of Daniel. But something in me stopped. Rage, yes, but also clarity. If I confronted her now, she would deny it. She would spin another story, and Daniel would defend her. He was already too deep, too blinded. So I swallowed the fury and forced myself to breathe. My heart ached with every beat, but my mind sharpened. I needed proof. I needed to know just how deep her deception went before I risked shattering my son's world. From that moment on, I decided I would smile when she smiled, nod when she spoke sweetly, and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. All the while, I would be watching, listening, waiting. Sophie played her part to perfection. She leaned into Daniel's side, laughed at his jokes, and touched his arm with that effortless grace that made him beam with pride. To anyone else, she looked like the dream partner, thoughtful, charming, devoted. And Daniel was utterly convinced. He glowed with the kind of happiness that blinded him to everything else. But behind my polite smile, my chest burned. Every sweet word she offered me felt like acid dressed in sugar. I nodded. I thanked her. I even laughed when it was expected of me. It was exhausting, holding my fury under layers of civility, pretending that I hadn't heard her mocking words, that I didn't know what she was really after. Each moment with her was like walking barefoot over broken glass, outwardly calm, inwardly bleeding. Still, I played along. I had to. Confronting her without proof would only drive Daniel further into her arms. He would see me as bitter, jealous, unwilling to let him go. So, I kept my mask as firmly in place as hers, even as it tore me apart inside. It was Clara, my niece, who gave me the first glimmer of hope. She worked in a government office, sharp and resourceful, the kind of woman who noticed details others missed. When she met Sophie, her smile was polite, but her eyes lingered, assessing. Later, when we spoke quietly in the kitchen, Clara's voice was steady. She said she could run a discreet check, that if something was off, she'd find it. That was the lifeline I needed. I couldn't protect Daniel with feelings alone. I needed facts. Proof that would break through the illusions Sophie had woven around him. And so, I kept smiling, kept nodding, all the while waiting for the truth Clara promised to uncover. The day Clara handed me the envelope, my heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I had asked her for answers, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. Inside were pages of official-looking documents, reports, even old photographs that told a story far darker than anything I had imagined. At first, it was the resumes, polished, impressive, but each one traced back to companies that had no record of her, jobs that never existed, degrees from universities that had never issued them. Sophie had built her image on paper castles, every detail carefully fabricated. Then came the aliases, not just Sophie Dupont, the woman smiling at my dinner table, but 3, 4 other names tied to the same face, different passports, different stories, each one linked to another man, an American, usually middle-aged or successful, who had vanished from her life once she got what she wanted. The investigator's notes painted a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. Quick marriages, sudden financial gains, green cards, bank accounts drained, and then silence. Every man had thought he was special. Every man had believed her lies. Daniel wasn't her first target. He was simply her next. Worse, she wasn't acting alone. The evidence tied her to a network. A group of people orchestrating these sham marriages like a business. Fake parents to play the part. Lawyers who knew how to bury paperwork. A trail of victims who never saw the danger until it was too late. I remember sitting there, the papers trembling in my hands, my stomach hollow with dread. Anger surged hot through me, anger at Sophie, at the lies, at the thought of my son walking blindly into her trap. But beneath it all was fear. Daniel's proposal was close. Too close. Once he committed, she would have everything she needed, and pulling him back would be nearly impossible. Time was running out. I had the truth now, undeniable and sharp as a blade. But how could I use it? How could I expose Sophie without destroying my son in the process? And that's when the stage was set for a dinner unlike any other, where Sophie's so-called parents would arrive, and her mask would begin to crack. The night of the dinner arrived, and I set the table with shaking hands hidden behind steady movements. Sophie swept in with her so-called parents, both dressed impeccably, their smiles rehearsed, their gestures a little too polished. To Daniel, it all seemed charming, like something out of a family movie. To me, it felt staged, every detail just slightly off. The meal began with polite small talk. They praised my cooking, complimented the house, asked Daniel about his work. It was smooth, practiced, almost too seamless. I smiled, nodded, poured wine, all the while studying every flicker in their eyes. Then came the French. They assumed, as always, that I was just another American mother who couldn't follow along. But I caught every word. The father's accent slipped Parisian one moment, Belgian the next. Their stories contradicted each other, a hometown that shifted, a family business that changed details mid-sentence. My ears sharpened, my heart pounding as I pieced together the truth, and then I heard it, in soft, hurried French. They whispered about Daniel's proposal, the green card, the need for a quick wedding, their confidence that I would never suspect. Each phrase was a dagger, cutting away the last shred of doubt. I sat there with my fork poised, my smile frozen, as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was burning. The rage, the betrayal, the fear for my son, all of it boiled beneath my calm exterior. Yet alongside it rose something stronger, resolve. They thought I was blind. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea that every word of their scheme was now mine to use. As dessert was served, I made my silent vow. This charade would not last much longer. They had played their game in my home, at my table, under my roof. But the final move, the one that would bring it all crashing down, belonged to me. Christmas Eve glowed in my living room. The tree sparkled, candles flickered, and Daniel's hands trembled as he slipped the velvet box into his pocket. His eyes carried the joy of a man certain he was about to change his life forever. I watched him, torn between pride and dread, my heart pounding with every carol that floated through the air. Among the guests was a man I had introduced casually as a friend of Clara's. He blended easily, glass in hand, laughter timed with the crowd. No one knew the truth of who he really was or why he was here. Daniel stood, his voice unsteady but full of love, and I saw Sophie's face light up in practiced sweetness. He barely bent to one knee before the air cracked open. The agent's voice cut through the warmth, cold and unflinching. He named Sophie for who she truly was, a woman with stolen identities, sham marriages, a trail of fraud stretching across years. The room froze. And then Sophie's smile dropped. Her voice turned sharp, venomous, as she mocked Daniel for being so gullible. Gone was the gentle fiancé. What stood before us was a predator unmasked. Daniel's face crumpled, caught between fury and disbelief. His eyes darted to me, filled not just with betrayal from her, but from me too, for keeping silent until this moment. My chest ached, but I held my ground. I had chosen this path to protect him, even if it meant carrying his anger. The handcuffs clicked, harsh and final. Sophie didn't resist. She smirked as if mocking us all. And then she was gone, swallowed by flashing lights and the heavy silence she left behind. The house, once glowing with Christmas warmth, felt hollow. Daniel stood shattered, the ring box still unopened in his palm. I knew nothing would ever feel the same again. The days after Sophie's arrest felt heavy, like walking through a house where the lights had gone out. Daniel barely spoke at first. His pride had been crushed, his trust shattered, and though I wanted to hold him like I did when he was little, I knew he needed space to grieve in his own way. Slowly, he began to let me in again. There were tears, silences, and long walks where words came only in fragments. He told me he felt foolish, that he should have seen through her. And I told him the truth, that love makes fools of us all sometimes. But it doesn't mean we stop loving. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from the real Camille. She explained that her identity had been stolen before, and she was deeply sorry for the pain it caused our family. There was no pretense in her words, just honesty and a quiet grace. When Daniel finally met her, I saw something shift in him. He didn't fall in love overnight, but he found comfort in her sincerity. Her presence reminded him that truth still exists, even in a world full of deception. In time, Daniel forgave me too for keeping my secret until the end. He understood that my silence came from protection, not betrayal, and though scars remained, they became part of his strength. What Sophie left behind was devastation. Yes, but also a strange kind of gift. Daniel learned to value honesty above appearances, to trust his instincts, and to rebuild not just his heart, but his faith in people. Redemption came not through erasing the pain, but through carrying it forward as wisdom. Looking back, I realized this story was never just about Sophie. It was about learning to trust the quiet voice inside me, the one that warned me even when my heart longed to believe. It was about understanding that love without honesty is only an illusion, and that appearances, no matter how polished, can hide dangerous truths. For Daniel and for me, the lesson was painful, but it was also necessary. We learned that resilience doesn't come from avoiding betrayal, but from surviving it and refusing to let it define us. We learned that true strength lies in valuing ourselves enough to walk away from lies, even when they come wrapped in charm and beauty. I share this not just as a confession, but as a reminder for anyone listening who has doubted themselves, ignored red flags, or held onto hope longer than they should. Your instincts matter. Your worth matters. And healing is always possible, even after the deepest betrayal. If this story touched you, I'd love for you to share it. Like this video, leave a comment with your own lessons learned, and pass it along to someone who might need to hear it. Together, we can remind each other to choose truth over deception, always.